doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.
There's a question which is, to what extent should the historic trade marginalization of continents like Africa from global supply chain and value chains for finished goods feature as an ESG and human rights issue for companies and investors? In Africa, in many respects, has been affected by its legacy of colonization and has been subject to the export of raw materials alone. Of course, I know that with your experience in the minerals, you may have some comments on this, and perhaps you as well, Dan, to give your earlier comments about the need for action in other continents, not just in Europe. Thanks. Who would like to have a go?
Well, I'm not sure whether you will hear much from me whether the finished goods objective or target should be part of the ESG. What I can only testify that based again on the minerals experience, we're seeing attempts to bring parts of the supply chain, notably then smelters and refiners, to Africa. So to make that, at least to have that important part of the supply chain also closer to the sourcing operations. So that's the only thing we're seeing so far, I must say.
Thanks,
I mentioned in my intervention on the difficult conversations to have, the conversation about legacy and colonialism. And that is very visible, tangible in Africa. Legacy is perhaps less tangible in Latin America, where I live, because our independence took place way before. But let's say the reminiscence of class and race remains very, very tangible on the daily life of human rights defenders, for example. And the power imbalance, without being challenged, is part of our normal. So it's kind of accepted by our elite that is normal to have power imbalance. And it's not even something to be discussed, because that is how the world is. And that is, of course, legacy. So we do have a difficult or uncomfortable conversation to have with the local elites. And that is something that certainly can be pushed by the EU, can be pushed by large European companies through your subsidiaries and your business relationships to challenge those elements that are linked to legacy, that are of many aspects awful nature. And I will say that goes hand in hand with the power imbalance and the need to strengthen capacity at local level and to gain ownership by the local business community, but also that business community to understand that they need to be legitimate in the eyes of the other locals, their own stakeholders, in this context of power imbalance. So I will say there's a lot of room there for improvement, certainly a lot of room for improvement, where large brands can do a lot if you act together, collectively. And there are some experiences of collective action. Let's say the Bangladesh Accord and what's going on there, the Thailand fishery turnaround in experience, and in some other, let's say, sectors where when there is collective action, there is a realistic opportunity for change. And that requires leadership from the top and from the ones that are more enlightened, understanding that there are a number of issues that are not in the public domain. No one will talk about racism, or no one will talk about classism in the context of, let's say, my part of the world, or Africa, or Southeast Asia, let's say. It will be very, very, let's say, unpolite, uncomfortable, almost an impossible conversation. But that can be brought in by a third party, hopefully in a coalition, in order not to expose one particular brand to some sort of retaliation or bad feelings, etc. But a lot of room in this question for improvement. Thank you.
Perhaps if I may add, from our experience, which is one of my other hats, is we're of course monitoring on the general system of preferences, which are the somewhat generous trade preferences we give to countries as different as from Pakistan to Sri Lanka and even to Cambodia, where you over the years the current scheme is now in operation, I think, for a good 8 years, and the Commission just adopted a proposal for a new scheme, legally to be applied as from the 1st of January 24. What we saw there is very slow and very incremental, this movement up the value chain. You see it within textiles to certain certain products within the textile sector. You see it moving to different sectors such as medical equipment, or in the case of even of Cambodia under the partial withdrawal, but we didn't touch that sector, the bicycle industry. So we were also very careful not to touch, even with a partial withdrawal of preferences, Cambodia, to touch those sectors, at least we try to avoid those, where they had moved up the value chain. Again, but it's a very slow movement. In a way, our tariff preferences are double-edged swords. The fact that we give preferences makes sure that you can still continue to produce basic material at zero import duties. But again, I'm not sure whether any ESG reporting and requirement in itself will actually make that change happen.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. So I suggest we will now take a closer look at the business perspective of regulation.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa